Om Shri Chinmaya Sadgurave Namaha. Hari Om. Kenopanishad Chapter 2. We have got here the warning that if you think you know well, you know very little, because none of us, not even the masters, can say that Atma is understood or known, since the Atman is not knowable but the knowing principle. Brahman or Atman is not seen, heard, or understood or known as an object. I can see this form of the microphone, and you too can see this form, because this form is different from me and you. You can see your hands or fingers and admire their beauty in your spare moments. Why? Because the fingers are something different from the instrument of seeing, the eye. But you can never see your eyes yourself. Similarly, the Atman that sees, understands, knows, and perceives cannot be perceived, known, understood, nor seen. What can we do then when we have ended our ego? There is no question of the I. The Atman alone remains then as a vital personal experience. There is no I at all at the end of successful sadhana, so that this does not despair need not be ours. We shall become truth. A man bathing in the river loses his gold ornament and desperately searches for it repeatedly in the water and at last gets it. His joy is inexplicable at the moment of recovering it. But how will he explain his joy? Under the water, his sense of speech is hushed, and so he cannot express his joy at that very moment. Similarly, the Atman is beyond explanation at the very moment of experiencing it. You can only meditate yourself into it. There is no I and you remaining at all during the final moments of beatitude. This merger is possible, is the daring assertion of the Vedantic seers. Every day we are living through three planes of consciousness. What we see in the waking state is contradicted by that in the dream state. The food that we have taken in the waking state is not available in our dream condition, because after a sumptuous meal we can go to bed and yet can experience within a few minutes a dream of starvation. Also, the moment we come out of the dream world, the feast we had consumed there will not at all end our waking state hunger. What is real in one plane is not real in another. When you go to the deep sleep state, there is neither the waking state world nor the dream world. Both of them are contradicted. There is yet another state of consciousness called the fourth state, discovered by the great masters of the Upanishads, namely the Turiya state, otherwise known as the God consciousness. The plane of God consciousness is thus the fourth state. In this state of perfection, we shall realize that all the other three planes of consciousness are but a long, long dream. All sadhanas are but conscious efforts to transcend the pain ridden limitations and rise into the all bliss, all perfect realm of the fourth state. Now we do not have any experience of this transcendental fourth state or its divine might, as we have come to believe the Jagat dream as real. A doll made of salt tied to a string and dipped into the ocean will not come back when pulled up to report the depth. The doll gets melted into the very form of the ocean. The salt doll was the ocean. It was born in the ocean, but it has for a time an identity of its own and a form. But once having reached the bosom of its own nature and remaining there for a time, it becomes the very ocean that it eternally was. That is the salt doll ego, which exists as a superimposition upon truth, pure salt, assumed for a time certain false forms and names, but when actually it entered the mass of its own nature, it got merged there with its own Swarupa. Similarly, in the fourth state, the Turiya state becomes because there is no instrument for vikshepa, tossing of the mind, the bliss of the oneness with the entire universe is experienced. On Om, we superimpose as an as on an idol the three states of consciousness. Om is made up of three sounds A, U, M, A, O, Ma, wherein the sadhaka superimposes on sound A, the waking state, on U, the dream state, and on Ma, the deep sleep state. The long drawn hum of Om is to represent the Turiya state, and the silence between each Om chanted is the final subtlest point to fix the attention of the meditator. By then, the mind of the meditator becomes so pure and steady that once he succeeds in plunging into the depths of this bliss silence, his mind is no more there and he experiences the transcendental truth. The subjective experience alone can give us the knowledge of the pure Atman, truth without its conditionings. In this subjective Atman Anubhava alone can man reach the fulfillment of his life's divine mission, the dream mirage. We have so far examined the illumination factor, the Chaitanya in us, with the aid of a metaphor from a beam of light striking a reflecting surface and producing a pool of reflection. The reflection thus thrown forth by the intellect is called technically in Vedanta the Chidabhasa. Chit, the Chaitanya or the illuminator, and its Abhasa meaning its reflection. Just as the sun is seen reflected in a pool of water, so too the Chidabhasa is recognized in the mental pool when the light of truth strikes the mind. This Chidabhasa, thus playing a false dallying in the mental theater, in the false toy monster called the ego, the annihilation of the ego. It is said with a divinely sweet persistence of Vedanta is the experiencing of truth. This being the promise given by the Shrutis, we shall be better equipped to undertake our pilgrimage to truth if we know some intimate characteristics of this ego. The Supreme Intelligence, the Atma Chaitanya, eternally self effulgent, shines ever bright at the center of the center in the human heart. It gets reflected as it strikes against our intelligence. As we are living today in a passionate hunt after sensuous objects, our intellect, along with our entire attention, is turned totally outwards. Thus, the flame of reflection, the intelligence, is slightly at an angle, like the hood of an angry serpent just before it strikes. Naturally, a pool of reflected light is thrown, as it were, in front of the original supreme light, like innocent children who get frightened at their own shadows. We fall a prey to many a hallucination produced by our own misunderstanding that the reflected light is the truth absolute. The reflection, as we know, depends entirely upon the condition and nature of the reflecting surface at the moment of mental and intellectual agitation. The Chidavas seems to tremble and dance in mad revelry when the intellect is dimmed by the fumes of jealousy, anger, passion, and lust. The egocentric entity in us undergoes corresponding modification. Thus, we see one who is ordinarily a quiet, innocent, and decent individual under the stress of anger and lust, suddenly deforming himself into a dreadfully ugly monster. In every Dr. Jekyll, there is a manifestation of Mr. Hyde every now and then. So long as the intellect is turned outwards, propped up by our mortal desires, this egocentric delusion and a consequent sense of separateness will continue in us. With the sense of separateness, naturally the entire chains of sorrows come to shackle us and make us victims of our own bondage. The attempt of a sadhaka is to end these limitations and rise to a plane of existence where he shall rest in peace eternally. Brahmavidya, as contained in Vedanta, caters to this nameless and formless, and yet all the same most poignant unrest of the soul by prescribing a certain discipline of the mind and intellect. The extrovert nature in us is the cause of the ego sense. Ending ego is reaching the perfect. When by practice or self control our sense organs have come to a certain extent under our control, we, the divine lives, start the practice of inquiring the self within through deep and long meditation. This Vedantic sadhana when continued for a long, unbroken interval, brings about a slow closing down of the extrovertedness in our intellect. We have already found that the intellect, when it raises its serpentine hood in its outward running nature, throws a pool of reflected atmic glory called the ego. When during sadhana, the student through self discipline effects develops more and more introvert nature, the false pool of light moves towards its origin until at last, when the intellect is entirely turned within, the reflection coincides with or merges into the eternal, the reality. The ego then gets totally sublimated, and ours shall be the transcendental experience of our own true nature, Godhood. This is the fulfillment of our life. This is supreme success. This is achievement. Truth, the self, which is the sacred theme of the Upanishads, lies beyond the intellect, and it illumines constantly the very intellectual experiences themselves. So to declare, I have understood is not the final realization of the consciousness by which I have recognized the idea I have understood. Hence, the student is advised to continue his investigations. This final experience of our eternal nature is not an objective knowledge but an intimate subjective experience. As such, it is rather difficult it is rather difficult for words to express this deep experience, just as we can only mumble eloquence and yet fail to express our deep love for our mother, sister, or son. However much we may explain the joys of eating sweets, we may succeed to an extent only in expressing the grosser objective aspects of it. We fail in our attempt to convey the subtler subjective experience of the taste of the sweets. As such, hence we have the disciples' words in the following mantra. नाहं मन्ये सुवेदेति नून वेदेति वेद च यो नस्तद्वेद तद्वेद नो न वेदेति वेद च. I do not think that I know it well, but not that I do not know, I know too. Who amongst us comprehends it both as the not known and as the known? He comprehends it. The Guru's kind and critical warning was that the self is not known as an object other than the knower himself, and that all such understandings are but the comprehensions of the intellect and mind, and not the true experience of truth through the divine eye, the intuition. The disciples' answer as contained in the stanza is quite revealing and expressive. There is an entire drama packed in this single mantra, a drama of the student's inner mind. In utter obedience to his teacher, he first admits that he does not think I know it well. But when he looks within, it is a lie, and so he confesses, but not that I do not know. By the time he has finished this much of a true confession, he has become overwhelmed by his own intimate personal experience, and therefore he emphatically asserts, I know too. These statements would look like the mad ravings of one who is not in his senses. This language of confusing contradictions alone can be employed in dramatizing the feelings of the student who has really risen above the ordinary planes of experiences and has come to live the transcendental divine consciousness. The student admits with reference to the memories of his own transcendental experiences of pure self that certainly his knowledge of it is not similar to his knowledge of chairs and tables. An object other than yourself can be known by you as well or not so well, etc. But your knowledge of yourself is not the same as your knowledge of your son or wife. I know myself through and through better than anything else in this world. The self knowledge is a million times more subjective, and hence the knowledge of self awareness is too deep to express in words. Words, after all, can express and convey knowledge only through a series of references to known experiences. In short, language must break in its attempts to express the inexpressible because the experience of truth is not an impression received by the mind of an object but is the self awareness of pure consciousness gained when the mind of the sadhaka gets annihilated through his yoga sadhana. Language plays only in the field of the mind and intellect, and their death dances. The more the intensity of an experience, the subtler becomes the words, and the more loose the construction of the sentences. Hence, we have in this sacred mantra a statement seemingly self contradictory, but in fact an expressive representation of the feelings experienced. The student comparing his intuitive experience of truth with his ordinary sense experiences of the world says, I do not think I know well. His knowledge of truth, though complete and full, is not, he feels, anything like his knowledge of a table or a chair. The knowledge of the objects of the world is gained through the functioning of the sense organs and through a process of estimating the mental reactions caused by them. But the student has gained certainly a very intimate knowledge of the self in him, and yet it is not as an object other than himself that the self is recognized as one's own real nature, is the uniform experience of all masters. Though strange be the student's discovery, stranger seems to be his mental condition after his self discovery. He has realized that he is knowledge itself, and yet his difficulty is in that his realization is not in the knowledge of, but it is in the knowledge as. That is, he has not realized the self as we realize, for example, our thoughts in us, but he has realized the knowledge as such. To the Western philosophers, such an experience is so strange and abnormal that they cannot understand or appreciate the student's mental situation. Thus, in the foreigner's unsympathetic approach, he reads in the Upanishadic mantras nothing more intelligible than mere blabbering of humanity in its childhood. And indeed, even to the modern educated Hindus, this mantra is but the mad ravings of a youngster suffering from hysteria and melancholia. Though he admits that his experience is something novel, strange, and unparalleled, yet he is not ready to accept it because his awareness of it is so intimate and full. The only way in which the poor mortal in him could express the immortal he is by quoting or with reference to others who have experienced intuitively the same truth. Who amongst us comprehends it both as the not known and as the known? He comprehends it. Agama tradition of masters is the only evidence with reference to which one can express transcendental experiences. Even the scriptures adopt this means and often put statements into the mouth of some ancient master or other. The same method is adopted here by the disciple in Kenopanishad when he tries to discuss his inner intuitive experience of truth with his guru, who amongst us comprehends it, comprehends it, both as the not known and as the known. He comprehends it. यस्य मतं तस्य मतं मतं यस्य न वेद सः अविज्ञातं विजानतां विज्ञातमविजानताम्. He understands it who comprehends it not, and he understands it not who feels he has comprehended it. It is the unknown to the master of true knowledge, but to the ignorant it is the known. This mantra is a direct statement of Mother Shruti, explaining the truth for the benefit of her students. The maximum that the words can do in explaining the infinite is to state, as she has all done in the second line of the mantra. The moment we comprehended a thing, it is always through the instruments of our comprehension and understanding. They being limited, they cannot but fall in grasping the whole. Whatever words we can express must necessarily be something grasped earlier by our understanding. Thus, as we have already noted, truth expressed can be but the conditioned or the limited truth. The stanza may also be considered as the declaration of the teacher himself. When the best of his disciples, after listening to the first chapter, answered the teacher in a confused, self-contradictory statements as contained in the previous mantra, the lesser students in the class must have either felt stunned by it or giggled to bully the boy. Here, the teacher endorses that what was stated by the pupil is quite acceptable and that it is the only way in which the transcendental experience can be expressed. Language of intuition alone can soar to the realms of pure consciousness. Truth defined in words is truth defiled. The supreme reality, when experienced, shall be known as our own real self. A pain in a dark room, when brought into the veranda, may be considered as illumined by the sun. But it would be absurd to say that a thing in the sun is illumined by the sun. Illumination being the very substance of the sun. The function of illuminating can have a play only where there is darkness. The self, which is knowledge absolute, cannot be known by another knower other than itself. The sun never illumines itself since it is light itself. Kill the ego. Some years ago, a Marwari merchant of Bombay suffered 6 months of sleepless nights due to the persecution of a bug that one night entered his brain though through his ears. Every 15 minutes and sometimes oftener, the bug would creep around inside the skull, seeking for a more edible portion of the brain. The merchant went round the globe, meeting all the possible specialists, and yet had to return to India with his pet disease uncured. However, the merchant heard of a great doctor in Lucknow and reached that city with newly lit up hope. The doctor examined him elaborately and, reserving his opinion to himself, declared that he would try his best. Weeks passed. The merchant was almost raving and hysterical as repeated sleepless nights of agony and pain broke down his nervous system bit by bit. One day, the doctor approached the patient to inform him that in case the merchant would afford to send a man to the Western Front, the doctor could exert his influence with the Red Cross and procure for him a special medicine prepared by the Germans. Any expense, if it could only relieve him of the agonizing pain, was cheap for the merchant. Again, months passed. Despair and hopelessness was choking the merchant, when one day the doctor, in all cheer and smiles, approached the patient and showed him a parcel and said, "Here is the medicine. Now the miracle will be done. There are 3 tubes here. With one, we can make the bug swoon down for at least 2 3 days. The second, injected after a week, would kill the bug, and third would make the dead bug come out of the ears." The merchant was naturally much relieved and felt extremely hopeful. Was not the rare German specific for all bugs in the brain procured at such a heavy cost? The next day, the doctor, with half a dozen of other specialists, attended the patient in a well equipped operation theatre and administered the first of the 3 injections. As told by the doctor, the bug in his brain did swoon, and the patient had a restful night, probably the first night he had slept so soundly after many a month. However, after 3 days, the bug had started as usual, creeping and crawling around, eating the brains and burrowing holes in it. The merciless bug. A week passed. Again the operation theatre scene was repeated, and the patient then onwards felt that the bug was really dead. During the week, the patient was not even once disturbed by the enemy in his brain. On the day when the last of the injections was to be administered, all the medical college students were called to be in the operation theatre. All the elaborate precautions required for this serious and strange injection of the costliest and the most rare German medicine was enacted faithfully, and last of the injections was successfully carried out. After half an hour, the patient's ear was carefully washed, and lo, in the ear basin was the scene floating a bug, dead bug. The doctor lifted it with a pair of forceps to the gaze of the satisfied and contented patient. The patient was wheeled out to the operation theatre. The doctor went up the door and, after closing it carefully, wheeled round to face the silent audience of wondering students who were surprised that they should be invited to witness but a mere injection. Friends, addressed the practical scientist, you have been watching so far the cure of a very painful disease for which the patient could not get a cure all over the globe. And strangely enough, the German injection bottles were nothing but tubes of distilled water, which I had procured from the local chemist around the corner in the street. The most difficult part of the operation was, confessed the doctor, the hunt that I had to make yesterday night for a live bug. When at last I got one, I pressed it carefully between my fingers in one end of my kerchief and preserved the dead carcass, which was dropped into the ear before washing it. And it was that dead bug which I had hunted out last night, that you saw in the ear, when by the means are, maybe the means are unfair, but for an unreasonable patient's imagined diseases, the only cure can be the false medicines of mere attributed powers. Viewed spiritually, we all are living the delusions of the merchant. We are suffering the pangs of an imaginary bug in us. Identifying ourselves with the ego, we come to entertain the wrong notions of I-ness and myness, and the consequent sufferings, sorrows, limitations, finiteness, etc. Now we need a Lucknow doctor which will kill for us the bug in our brain, the ego sense, which with the rare medicine, the Atmajnana, which when its purpose has been served, shall be recognized as nothing new or rare, but as our own real nature. The truth, ever effulgent in its own light, wisdom, power, nature, presides over all our activities outside in the world and inside in our minds. We found how this supreme light gets reflected in the intellect and produces the bug for us, the ego pool of light. And there, the metaphor was deliberately stopped so that you may get some time to think over those ideas. On realizing the real, the unreal vanishes when the bhakta in devotion and love melts himself unto the prabhava of the Lord of his heart. The experience of this parabhakti is one of supreme consciousness, The experience of all masters is the same at the point of final culmination of all their sadhanas, whatever be the path pursued. Truth is the central temple where the pilgrims must finally reach. In the presence of truth, at the moment of his experiencing it, there shall never be an experiencer separate from the experienced. The Vaishnavites who belong to the Madhva and Ramanuja orders in their philosophies based upon duality claims that the realized God ever remains eternally separate from an equally eternal quantum called the separative ego sense in the sadhaka. But to the Vedantin, in his realization of the non dual truth, there is nothing but one homogeneous experience of divine pure consciousness at the summit of his spiritual perfection. The Dvaitin complains that if we become ourselves bliss absolute, who will then enjoy the joys transcendental? They seem to be worried with a desire to enjoy, although it is of a transcendental nature. To the Vedantin, in his extreme sense of renunciation, dispassion, and discrimination, he has discovered the futility and hollowness of an enjoyed joy gained by even the experience of a God other than himself. The Shrutis are unanimous in their declarations that anything other than the knower is false, and that infinite peace can only be gained by one who has come to live in entire identification with the self, the knower. The Shruti declaration that it is beyond the known and the unknown. The knower himself is self evident. Taking our metaphor of the reflection in a strip of mirror, we may now make an attempt to understand this process of the merger of the ego with the source of ego. Suppose a very powerful arc light is placed before a strip of mirror. We know from the rules of reflection that the reflection would always be as far behind the mirror as the object is in front of it. Suppose the arc light is 3 inches in front of the mirror, the reflection will be 3 inches behind the mirror. The knowledge absolute shedding its light of intelligence is in front of the reflection medium, our intellect, a spiritual aspirant, through discrimination comes to live the nobler values of the higher intellectual life and thus gains slowly and slowly a degree of introvertedness whereby the pool of light, the false ego, gets merged with the source. The bhakta becomes meek, tolerant, selfless, and divine. And yet, even at that state of full divine life, the sadhaka gains no subjective experience of the truth that he is. From this state of spiritual progress, the next lap of his pilgrimage is what is generally termed as abhyasa. What actually happens when one continues his meditation exercises is, figuratively speaking, that the reflection medium, the intellect, slowly gets moved nearer and nearer to the object. The light of the self soon a state comes when the reflecting surface is in contact with the object. When the arc light or the laboratory table is in contact with the mirror strip, what should we expect for a short interval of time? The mirror would certainly provide for the observer a clear reflection. The reflection is as far away from the object as the thickness of the mirror, but at the same time, it is observable fact that in the heat of the arc lamp, the mercury surface of the mirror melts off, and the strip of mirror shall no longer provide for us any reflection of the lamp. The reflection, since it cannot go anywhere else, the Shastras say has merged with its source. The intellect, during constant practice of daily meditation, gets steadily moved nearer and nearer the self until at last, in the white heat of intense experiencing of that transcendental truth absolute, the false egocentric notions disappear and the intellect merges itself with the infinite ocean of bliss and perfection, our real nature. That is the final experience of samadhi, and in the perception of the self through the intuitive eye, the God man becomes the self and shall not experience the truth as something other than himself. This is the declaration of all the Shrutis, nay, of even the living masters of our times, not only in Hindustan but in all the known religions of the world. This achievement, the real fulfillment of the life's journey, is within the scope of every mortal. It is this experience so subtle and full that has compelled the great disciple in Kenopanishad to cry out as he has done his vital experience in such a mumbled jumble of words of seeming madness as in the mantra we are now discussing. He understands it who conceives it not, and he understands it not who conceives it. The difficulty felt by the disciple is that at the moment of perfect God consciousness, there is no I-ness left to perceive it as an object, and the moment he is aware of his I-ness, he is not experiencing the state of Godhood. We cannot have a false vision of the ghost the and the real understanding of the post at one and the same time. The moment the rope is recognized, the serpent is not there. Where the ego is felt, God is not there. Vedantic realization of oneness is not the monopoly of the Hindus. Sri Yong Chia Ta Shi, the Chinese philosopher, also sings, "It is only when you hunt for it that you lose it. You cannot take hold of it, but equally you cannot get rid of it. And while you can do neither, it goes on its own way. You remain silent and it speaks. You speak and it is dumb." All yogas, be it bhakti, yoga, jnana yoga, karma yoga, or hatha yoga, are but different techniques to reach the same perfection by means of total annihilation of the inner enemy, the ego. Kill the ego, die to live the divine life. So cries the saint of Ananda Kutir. Listen to his call of self-redemption. Act diligently by pursuing the path of the true through devotion and love. Reach the goal of perfection, thy own self. The goal. In the egoless state of God consciousness, there cannot be the seer other than the seen. The aim of every yogin in the field of self perfection is the conscious move to prepare his inner instruments of understanding and perception in a single pointedness and thereafter to apply them in the adventure of discovering in a quick review how all the various yoga techniques are but different methods of purifying and perfecting the inner instruments and bringing them into the state of sharp single pointedness. When once the sadhaka has reached this perfection, he strives to get himself detached from the physical body consciousness. The outer world exists only with reference to our consciousness of our body. The moment we leave our body consciousness, we are not at all aware of the sense of the world objects and their sorrowful persecutions. This may not be quite palatable or acceptable to those who hear it for the first time, but it can be subjectively felt and lived, as in our experiences of the dream state, of the deep sleep state, or the deep sleep state. In both these conditions of awareness, we are not conscious of our physical body, and naturally, the physical world is also negated. Thus, a yogin, with the help of his divinely sharpened mind and intellect, turns his gaze towards inwards and towards the center of life, the Atma Tattva, the Self. To get detached from the external gross envelopments of matter is to get ourselves identified with our real nature as the Spirit. The declarations of Shastras are thus simple, direct, and unambiguous, but a mere understanding of the technique of the Brahma Vidya science will not give its fruit and liberation from mortal limitations. The barbarous jungle men of Africa cannot come to enjoy the blessings of civilization by a mere reading of the great textbooks. They will have to renounce their present way of living, the barbarous values of life, and take to the cultured values of life advocated in those textbooks. In short, however, often we may repeat as Mahamantra the name of Aspro. We cannot gain the blessing of relief from our headache unless we swallow the medicine. Similarly, for all the greatness of Vedanta as a philosophy, it cannot and will not give us any solace or joy merely because we have come to grasp its science intellectually. We must leave it entirely. No compromise is possible. No betrothal is a practical proposition between two opposite things. Light cannot be where darkness is. A seeker starts his pilgrimage with renunciation of the wrong negative values. This is the negative aspect of a positive sadhana. This is achieved by not merely the efforts of mere will or determination, but is hastened to a success by a positive cultivation of the qualities of righteousness. When such a divine life continues for long, his practices in any one of the four main paths of self perfection. He comes to gain a divine power called intuition. This faculty is now lying dormant in almost all of us. Yoga awakens it, and it is through the help of this newly discovered faculty that man reaches his native land of perfection. This intuitive perception of truth is not in any sense of the term a perception of an object like the table. Intuitively, the successful sadhak becomes perfection itself. Hence, the Guru warns the teacher and disciple. It is unknown in the man of true knowledge, but to the ignorant it is known. Mere bookish knowledge will not help in fulfilling the edicts of Indian philosophy, unlike the philosophies of the West. For us Indians, a mere academic understanding of an intellectual view of life is not philosophy. To the Indian mind, philosophy is at once a view of life and a way of life. A philosopher to us is not mere idle dreamer or an intellect spinner, but a hard and factual man of life who should know us also certain values and how best values of life and how best his philosophy can be lived and realized. It is very significant in this connection to note that the word philosophy is termed as Sanskrit darshanam, the emphasis being in the availability of those ideas of realization in the given life. Merely hearing Vedantic discourses may give the listeners a vague concept of it, but will not make the listeners men of perfection unless they are ready to live the Vedantins in life. It is an ill-informed idler's cry that Vedanta is divorced from life. In fact, there is no known method of living a fuller life than by organizing it upon a firm foundation of the Vedantic values of oneness and truth. A true Vedantin is a balanced individual. Neither he is over intellectual nor has he allowed his emotions to erupt into a dust storm and sully his intellect. Discrimination and dispassion have developed his intellect to an acute subtlety, and in his practical practices of love, kindness, tolerance, etc., he has expanded his mental qualities and emotions. When such an equally powerful mind and intellect are brought in to play in a happy synthesis in a given field of activity, inquiry, out of the combination rises, as it were, a third divine power in his bosom, called the intuition, the jnana chakshu, and the self is experienced through this instrument. प्रतिबोधविदितं मतम् अमृतत्वं हि विन्दते आत्मना विन्दते वीर्यं विद्यया विन्दते मृतम्. Indeed, he attains immortality who intuits it in and through every modification of the mind. Through the Atman, he obtains real strength, and through knowledge, immortality. The absolute truth presiding in us as the self is known well when only when it is knowingly understood as the witness of the three states of consciousness. A witness is one who is standing apart from the incident and who witnesses and views the incident without in any sense taking part in it. The witness has not even any interest in the incident, nor has he any prejudice against it. Unmoved and uninterested, a witness beams on the passing panorama in front of him. Similarly, if truth, the self, were to remain its status as the eternal, the immortal, the all pervading, it has to be a non doer and a non enjoyer, a mere dynamic witness. The experiences gained in the waking state are contradicted in the experiences of the dream state, and both these are negated in the world of sleep. And yet, the same individual can remember his experiences in his waking state and in his deep dream state, as well as he can remember that he knows nothing during the condition of deep sleep. It is well known that in order to remember incidents or happenings, the experiencer must himself have had the experiences. Unless I have lived an experience, I cannot remember it, however good my memory may be. I cannot remember any of your experiences, so too you must necessarily fail to remember the happenings in my life. From the above, we must conclude that there is an unchanging entity in in us who experiences all our waking life, dream world, and the sleep bliss. The waking state ego, the Mr. So and so entity, is not in the dream world, but on waking up from the dream, he remembers he had dreamt, that he had dreamt. That factor in us, in consultation with which we have this continuity of awareness and personality through the different fields of consciousness, is the all witnessing Atman. Thought Bodham, by thought Bodham Prati, is known Viditam, the presence of consciousness infinite. For all thoughts are known to us. The knower who becomes conscious of all thoughts is the light of consciousness, the Supreme. Thought is but a disturbance in the mental stuff, a ripple vritti in the mental pool. As the thoughts rise, dance, and die down, it is the consciousness that illumines the birth, existence, and activities, and the final death of all thoughts. Thus, at each thought disturbance, there must be a flicker in the consciousness, and this consciousness is intuitively realized as separate from the thoughts that it illumines. One who realizes this becomes immortal, changeless. The change is in the thought flow, the illumining light of consciousness. As a witness merely looks on the changing thought procession. To identify with this witness is to end the thraldom of the ego. Death and limitation, ego, death and limitation, sorrow and despair, success and failure, pleasure and pain, love and hate, and the 1,001 other poisonous weeds of life that embitter life all belong to the ego, to the all witnessing truth. Samsara is foreign, and to it light, power, wisdom is the bliss content of the samsara. In this identification with the self lies the secret of knowing the Atman as beyond the known and unknown. इह चेद्वेदी तथ सत्यमस्ति न चेदिहा वेदीन्महती विनष्टिः भूतेषु भूतेषु विचित्य धीराः प्रेत्यास्मान् लोकादमृता भवन्ति इति द्वितीयखण्डः. If one knows that Brahman here in this world, then the true end of all human aspirations is gained. If one knows not that here great is the destruction, the wise, seeing the one Atman in all beings, rise from sense life and become immortal. Kind Mother Shruti is here pouring out her anxious love in a clear warning to her grown-up children that in this birth alone shall we attempt and gain a degree of success in totally cutting away from our bondage and shackles. Freedom is the birthright of man. To seek and achieve it, he has taken his incarnation. After thousands of lives in various embodiments, as a result of the gallons of tears shed, the all-kind Lord has given us the rarest chance to be born as man. An embodiment in a human form is rare indeed. Even having got the form to have all indriyas intact is again an added blessing. Again, to possess a well-developed and balanced physical, psychological, and spiritual personality is the result of the Shastras declare many lives of continuous tapascharya and devotion. Lastly, to have all the above qualifications and yet to be without a chance to hear the secret knowledge of the truth absolute as contained in the Shrutis is to grope endlessly in thick darkness along an unending veil of tears. Glory to you all, you represent indeed the cream of generation. You have gained by your own self-effort in endless previous births the rarest of chances to study the Upanishads and come to know at least the conditioned truth. Each of you is a representative of at least a million in the world of mere two-legged worms crawling in filth, hapless and deluded. Hence, Mother Shruti says, great indeed is the destruction if one strives not and thus fails to recognize himself as the Atman. Without renunciation, no enduring successes can ever be gained by anyone at any time in the annals of human endeavor. Nature herself is roaring this truth. The fishes must renounce their capacity to swim if they were to the glory of gliding through space or their wings as birds. The birds must surrender their power of flying if they were to rise higher in evolution and reach the instincts of animals. The animals must slowly give up their hardness and gross physical capabilities if they are to gain the subtler powers of a blossomed mind and intellect. The ape man, if he were to renounce his tail and the jungle life, and lo, we have the coated booted insurance agent and the thundering politician, the last stage in the pilgrimage of man towards godhood, towards the state of supermanhood, is chalked out and directed by the Shrutis. The masters of wisdom unanimously cry that if man were to make one little renunciation, he shall step over to the realms of the divine, renounce the ego, and be a god. And this is possible now and here. In discrimination, learn to see the one truth that lies self evident in every name and form. This is the greatest worship and shall in the end take us directly to the audience chamber of truth. We shall meet him face to face and get ourselves merged into him. Having seen God, the man ends by becoming God. Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. Now and here, we have tried to understand Mother Shruti's anxiety at man's futile existence in the pursuit of mere physical desires and passions. She earnestly appeals to man to recognize what a rare chance he has in being born as a human being with all the indriyas intact, with a well developed and intellect, mind and intellect, and also with a glorious chance to have the contact of Sat Purushas and learn from their mouths the wisdom of the sages. It is her loving declaration and kind warning that she expresses in her words. One who has not known that here gets great is the destruction. A wise man speaking for and discovering the underlying truth principle in all names and forms lives happily in the wisdom of the self, and such a one Pretyasma Lokat, having left this world, Amruta Bhavanti, becomes immortal. Built upon this line and similar ones, we have two schools of thoughts among the Vedantis. One claiming that perfection cannot be achieved unless one leaves his physical body in death, and the other arguing in a different line and coming on to an altogether different conclusion, that the Shruti declaration points out that Godhood can be reached even while living as a man in this mortal world. The former accepts, therefore, only Videha Mukti, while the latter recognizes the state of Jivan Mukti. Of these two, Shankaracharya is a champion of the latter view, and his arguments certainly seem to be more appealing to all reasonable men. Chinmay also endorses that all the present day living masters whom he has met so far do emphatically assert, in words as well as in their actions, that man can rise to godhood and live the divine perfections even while he is in this body. Self realization is here and now. Sri Shankaracharya bases his arguments mainly upon scriptural definition of the Guru, which we had already examined thoroughly, and we find that the Guru is one who is well versed in the scriptures and well established in God consciousness. A mere knowledge of the scriptures cannot give the Pandit the status of a guru. If an aspiring individual by his self effort reaches the state of perfection pointed out by the great textbooks of Brahma Vidya, he must die instantaneously if he were to literally understand this line of the Shruti and thus meekly accept the Videha Mukti concept. But when we shall also but then we shall also never have a guru who is a Brahmanistha. Shankaracharya, however, concludes his arguments with the acceptance of the Jivan Mukti state. Then, what does the Shruti here mean when she says, having left this world, he becomes immortal? According to Shankar, it is not a physical disappearance from this seen through the trap door of death, but it is the emergence of the individual from the mortal delusory planes of existence, spent in the pursuit of the lower animal values, to higher planes of divine consciousness wherein he revels in God Himself. Amruta Bhavanti becomes immortal is the fruit promised by the Shruti for a man who has perfected himself in Vedantic sadhana. The individual body mind equipment, being products of matter and consequently finite, cannot be immortal in any sense of the term. Perishable as they are, how could a saint be said to enjoy immortality? The right view in which this portion of the Shruti is to be understood is not in its literal sense, but to the suggestive meaning of these pregnant words. Self discovery is a process of ending our false identifications and building up our true nature as the self. Having thus once understood through a vital subjective experience that one is the immortal soul and not the mortal body, we shall no more have the agonizing fear of death. To him, death has no sting. To him, death is but an incident in his life, as insignificant and common as one of the ordinary meal times or his daily dip in the Ganges. To him, death is but a change of clothes. Nay, it is like stepping out of the cage of stink and filth, where is a, where he is compelled to act the part of a slave to the limitations of the dream body, in which he is so far compelled to stay out of respect to the Lord. Chapter 3. The third chapter contains a story which is a symbolic representation of the truths so far discussed in the scriptures. The gods once won a victory over the demons with the help of the Supreme Truth, but blinded by their success, they started gloating over their achievements. In order to bless the gods, the Absolute Truth, in the form of an enchanting yaksha, gave a vision to the gods. The gods, surprised and amazed at the unusual glorious vision against the yonder horizon, approached Lord Agni and requested him to make personal inquiries and ascertain the identity of the adorable spirit Lord Agni consented and hastened towards the vision in full confidence and his of his own might and power. On being interrogated by the Supreme Lord, Agni boastfully declared that he is the mighty Lord of fire who can scorch universes at will. The Supreme Lord placed a piece of grass in front of Lord Agni and requested him to reduce it to ashes if he could. For all his vehement attempts, the god of fire, lord of meteors and suns, could not even warm the glass blade, even by a degree. Thus, completely crushed by his failure, Lord Agni returned, and to all the enquiries of the waiting crowd of gods, he only replied with a shrug of his shoulders, I don't know. The curious denizens of the heavens for the second time chose Lord Vayu and sent him on a commission to inquire the and ascertain the identity of that strange vision, equally proud and vain, glorious, egoistic, and self conscious. This mighty God strode forward to inquire and to know and gain a better status for himself over Lord Agni, the mightiest of the mighty, who has taken unto himself a form in time and space. I mean, that adorable spirit, inwardly laughing at the arrogance and upon the approaching heavenly agent. As before, the Yaksha asked who the visitor was. Lord Vayu, disclosing his identity and status, boasted himself he is the mighty Trodder of the skies, who can, as though in play, toss the universes hither and thither, as though they were paper balls and balloons. The Yaksha, placing the same old blade of grass in front, said, please move this a bit if you can, in my presence. Without him and his grace, who can accomplish anything? Poor Lord Vayu had to return in disgrace at his own strange and sudden impotency. When the gods thus found both Lord Agni and Vayu failing in their commission, they en masse made the commission entrusted to him by his. They made a deputation to their sovereign king Indra, accepting the commission entrusted to him by his divine populace. The faithful king made a royal pilgrimage towards the adorable spirit, seeing the approaching royal visitor, as though to register an extreme contempt and to make the king of the gods feel his significance. The Supreme chose to withdraw his manifestation as the tantalizing vision against the heavenly horizon. But Indra was not, in any sense of the term, blindly egoistic as the boastful self conceited earlier investigators. The ruler of the heavens was not despaired at the disappearance of the vision. On the other hand, the very disappearance added a greater poignancy to his earnestness to know. Instead of turning back from his sacred quest, he strode forward, hopping, expecting, wishing. Lo, at the very spot from where the Supreme had disappeared. Goddess Uma, daughter of Himavan, a splendor in precious stones, appeared to bless the honest seeker in Indra. From her, on inquiry, Indra heard in devotion that the Yaksha was none other than the eternal, non dual truth in assumed name and form, manifesting to bless the gods by warning them against their stupidity in believing that they had won a victory over the demons. The inner essence, the story in itself, when read as such, is but a skeleton, fit to be no greater a work than an Arabian Nights tale. But in fact, to the assiduous seeker who is approaching this seemingly childish story of the Yaksha, there are depths of significance to investigate, understand, and profit by. We must make an effort to grasp the inner essence of this narration in the Shruti. In this story, we have an exhaustive restatement of the Upanishadic truth so far discussed. In it, we have a glorious successful attempt to objectify the highly philosophical and subjective narrations so far had on the nature and significance of the self. In order to understand the full depth of the story, a certain preliminary knowledge of the Shastric traditions and beliefs is necessary. We have already discussed how from the unmanifest the manifest would emerge out in descending series of grosser and still grosser matter. Thus we had the Akash, ether, Vayu, air, Agni, fire, Jala, water, and ultimately Prithvi, earth, and five elements enumerated in order of their grossness, the earth being the grossest. We also noticed that each element has its own special quality. Akasha ether has sound as its property, Vayu air has, besides the quality of the previous subtler element ether, its own special quality of touch. Air has thus two qualities, sound and touch. Similarly, all the subsequent elements possess not only all the qualities of the previous ones but also a special quality of their own. Thus, the Agni fire we have sound, thus, in Agni fire we have sound, touch, and its own special quality form. In Jala, water, besides the qualities of fire, the water has taste, a quality strictly belonging to the element water. In Prithvi, earth, we have all the four qualities of all the four preceding elements and its own special quality, the smell. This being so, the Shastras in their own language say that the elements are the presiding deities of the corresponding sense organs that illuminate these qualities. The ear, which is the apparatus to receive the Akash quality, cannot and will not register, from which is the sense object to be perceived by the eye, presided over by the fire. With the above mentioned Shastric tradition in our mind, if we were to reread the seemingly important story, we shall discover its purpose in Kenopanishad. since there is not much of a difficulty in interpreting the word meanings in the long story part of this Upanishads. We propose to give below all the mantras and their translations at one stage. At one stage. ब्रह्मः देवेभ्यो विजिज्ञे तस्य ब्रह्मणो विजये देवा अमहीयन्त त ऐक्षन्तास्माकमेवायं विजयः अस्माकमेवायं महिमेति. Preceptor said, it is said that Brahman once won a victory for the gods over the demons. Though the victory was due to Brahman, the gods became elated by it and thought, to us belong the victory, to us belong the glory. Tadhaisham vijajño tebhyoh pradurvabhuva tanna vyajanata kimidam yakshamiti. Brahman, knowing their vanity, appeared before them, but they did not understand who that adorable spirit was. Te agnima bruvan jatavede tadvijanehi kime tadyakshamiti tatheti. They said to Agni thus, O Jataveda, all knower, find out what this great spirit is. He agreed. Tadabhyadravat tamabhyavadat कोसीति अग्निर्वा अहमस्मीत्यब्रवीत् जातवेदा वा अहमस्मीति. Agni hastened to the spirit. The spirit asked him who he was, and Agni replied, Verily, I am Agni, the omniscient. Tasmigam stvai kim viryamiti apidagam sarvam daheyam yadidam pruthivyamiti. He, Brahman, in the form of Yaksha, asked him, What power hast thou, who are of such a nature? Agni replied, I can even burn whatsoever there is on earth. Tasmai trunam nidadhave taddaheti tadupapreyaya sarvajavena tanna shashakadagdhum satateva nivavrutte naitadashakam vidnyatum yadetadyakshamiti. He, Brahman, placed a blade of grass before him, saying, Burn it. Agni dashed at it with all his power. He could not burn it. So he returned to the gods, saying, I could not find out who that adorable spirit was. Athavayuma bruvan vayave tadvijanehi kime tadyakshami tatheti. The Devas then said to Vayu, Wind, O Lord of the winds, find out who this adorable spirit is. He agreed. Tadabhyadravat tamabhyavadat kositi vayurva ahamasmityabravit matarishva va ahamasmiti. Vayu hastened to the spirit. The spirit asked him who he was, and Vayu replied, I am Vayu, I am really Matarishva, the trotter of the skies. Tasmigam stvaikim viryamiti apidagam sarvamadadiyam yadidam pruthivyamiti. What power resides in thee? Why art thou of such a nature? Asked the spirit. Why, I can blow away everything, whatever there is on earth, said Vayu. Tasmai trunam nidadhave tadadat-sveti tadupapreyaya sarvajavena tanna shashaka datum satateva nivavrutte naitadashakam vidnyatum yadetadyakshamiti. The Yaksha placed a blade of grass before him, saying, Blow this away. He approached it with all his power, but was not able to move it. So he returned to the gods and reported, I could not find out who that great spirit was. अथेन्द्रमब्रुवन् मघवन्नेतद्विजानीहि किमेतद्यक्षमिति तथेति तदभ्यद्रवत् तस्मात् तिरोदधे. Then the gods said to Indra, the chief of gods, O Bhagavan, worshipful or the possessor of great wealth and power, find out who that adorable spirit is. He agreed and hastened towards the spirit, but the spirit disappeared from his view. सतस्मिन्नेवाकाशे स्त्रियमाजगाम बहुशोभमानामुमागं हैमवतीं तागं होवाच किमेतद्यक्षमिति इति तृतीयखण्डः. And in that very spot he beheld a woman, Uma, the damsel, fair, the daughter of the snowy mountain Himavan, and asked her who this adorable spirit could be. Chapter 4. Reviewing the story against the background provided by the Shastric principles we have already discussed. We shall now come to grasp the Vedantic import indicated and suggested by this seemingly childish story. We found that the five phenomenal elements represent among themselves the sense organs, and hence we have the Shastric injunctions which declare each one of them as the presiding deity of each of the organs. Viewing thus, we shall find that the gods, meaning the higher spiritual values of the life, love, tolerance, patience, kindness, charity, piety, sympathy, etc., having won a victory over the demons, meaning the lower animal values of life, hatred, prejudice, anger, jealousy, selfishness, egoism, vanity, etc., with the help of the eternal self, came to tumble down into a misconception and a deluded conceit. A sadhaka in his initial stages of sadhana is apt to grow vainful over his very sadhana and go around declaring about the hours he spends in meditation, the higher qualities he is practicing, the experiences that he is having, etc. At such moments, the Supreme Lord appears before the sadhaka in the form of an adorable spirit, a mysteriously strange and captivating doubt about the nature of the very reality he is seeking. Again, the seekers of truth, in their immaturity, try to meet the Supreme as an object other than themselves. The commission of the Agni to inquire into the nature of the vision and his failure to understand the Yaksha is a parable explaining to us a deeper subjective limitation in that the truth absolute cannot be experienced as an object either by the sense organs, the eye, the organ of action and speech. Lord Agni's miserable failure at burning even a thin blade of grass in the presence of the eternal self without its blessings is an ample statement of a reliable fact that the eye is blind without the eye of the eye. Functioning similarly, speech is dumb without the divine speaker of the speech. Shameful retreat alone was the lot of Lord Vayu, who arrogantly approached the eternal power, claiming to himself an independent might enough to sway, if he chose, even the universe. In fact, Lord Vayu had to disillusion himself and discover that he could not move even a blade of grass without the sanction and warrant of the power behind the yaksha. Subjectively viewed, we have found that Vayu represents the presiding deity of the sense of smell and a reproductory function in us, ripped of its verbal vesture. It reveals it in its nakedness the truth again, that neither can we smell our truth nor shall we preserve to our species without the divine potency gracing the reproductory organs. In short, the despicable failure of the two mighty gods Agni and Vayu to investigate, understand, and know the exact identity of the Yaksha is but a restatement of the Upanishadic truth dealt with already in the first chapter, namely Anya Devatad Viditadatho Aviditadadhi, meaning that it is different from what is known and it is beyond what is unknown, it being none other than the knower himself. Lastly, the divine instincts in the sadhaka, the gods in Mase, approach their lord, the mighty Indra. Indra can also be interpreted as Indriyanam Raja, the lord of the sense organs, meaning the mind. When the higher spiritual seeker in us thirsts to know and to understand the adorable self, he may, in his delusion, try at first to grasp the truth through his usual instruments of recognition, the sense organs and action organs. Naturally, he fails, but if his thirst for knowledge be deep and urgent enough, he shall certainly approach the Lord of the Indriyas, the mind, and commission it for this higher purpose of knowing the unknowable. The mind of the seeker, when it has gained the Indra sthiti, slowly and steadily approaches it in meek surrender and without any trace of selfish arrogance or vanity, anxiously seeking to know, and on the mind's approach, the very vision of the Supreme disappears. As the sadhak tries to grasp the reality within and approach the adorable glory, he would be the his would be the experience of the disappearance of his first very quest. Many are the sadhakas in the Vedanta path who at this juncture in haste return to declare that the yaksha is non existent. The rationalists, logicians, and nihilists among the Buddhists are the examples of a hasty, impatient Indra, returning disappointed without reaching the goal of his discovery. The story in the Shruti clearly hints at this possible tragedy and advises us in the character of Indra and his ultimate success that we should not be impatient but must wait and continue our pursuit until we get at some positive knowledge of truth. In short, he is a pure Vedantic sadhak, earmarked for the final victory, who has come to perfect Indra sthiti. Now, being cowed down at the sudden and unexpected disappearance of the theme of his inquiry, Indra, with a heart beaming with hope and faith and throbbing with a deep desire to understand and to know, gazes on merely at the very spot from where the vision has disappeared, expecting nothing, hoping nothing, desiring nothing, wanting nothing, is at such moments of inner calmness and fully awakened awareness do the yogins come to recognize the Lady of Knowledge, Mother Shruti, the aspirant who has gained through his sadhana such an Indra, like noble will, divine determination, sincere heart, desireless mind, and an alert and vigilant intellect, is the fittest adhikari for Vedanta, and to such a fit student success is sure, if he be as modest, egoless, and persevering as the hero in the Shruti story. Religion is not for one who wants to make some makeshift arrangements to escape the immediate challenges of life. The one who runs into a temple to pray and to beg when he loses his last tenor in a race course befitting season is an intruder and a blasphemer of religion. He is worse than one who has the mad idiocy and the feminine courage to commit suicide at such moments of tension. Indra was not to wait long in that state of excruciating Godward anxiety. The Lord of our hearts is too kind and merciful to keep his true devotees even for a moment too long in their all-out anxiety to realize him. The wondrous Lady of Himavan, the goddess of Brahma Vidya, born in the very caves of the Himalayan inner silence, appeared at the very spot where the Yaksha had disappeared. To a mature spiritual aspirant, Shruti shall always go out to console, comfort, lead, guide, and to encourage him. It is from the mouth of Srimati Himavat Kumari that Indra, for the first time, heard that the Yaksha was no other than one of the direct manifestations which Paramatman had assumed upon himself to bless the dreaming self by curing the very ulcer of its delusions and the consequent sorrows, the separative ego sense and its hollow vanities. Such a theoretical theoretical uh, theoretical such a theoretical knowledge as heard from the mouth of the very goddess of learning is called the Paroksha Jnana. Paroksha Jnana, and this in itself fake cannot take the listener to the supreme goal of his seeking, namely the realm of perfection that lies beyond the stormy horizons of tears and trials. Moksha is that state of perfection where there are no limitations and where the triple pronged tormentor of the mortals, the time space causality, never gains an entity. This state can be achieved only when the disciple, after hearing the declaration of truth from the masters, has brought the very truth within the frontiers of his own ultimate, intimate, subjective experience, aparoksha jnana. On realizing that the self in us is the all self pervading everywhere, then alone can we end once for all our sapless delusions and profitless sorrows. Conditioned Brahman. Examples, illustrations, comparisons, and stories are often used in the Upanishads to explain to us the inexplicable. It is evident then that none of these stories of illustrations can be literally true in their application, nor can the truth entirely be explained away by any one of them. This being the literary tactics of the seers of the Upanishadic mantras, every story or illustration employed by them needs a deep inquiry if the student were to profit fully by them. In a sense, illustrations are employed in Vedanta to serve as idols in Bhakti Marga. No piece or of stone in any temple can provide for the devotee his life's goal of achieving happiness and peace. But without an idol, self improvement is impossible. The idol is the means, self discovery is the goal. To confuse the means with the goal is the grand trunk road leading to sorrow. The idol serves the spiritual aspirant as a springboard to heave himself out of samsara and plunge into himself. The superconscious state, otherwise called the state of God consciousness, is reached when a devotee, through self surrender or through full discrimination, dissociates himself from his false ego dream and comes to establish himself in the true conviction that he is the Atman. This process of detaching oneself away from the unreal and attaching oneself to the real is the process of self perfection. And this technique can be put into practice efficiently only by one who has trained his mind and intellect to run in a direction willed by himself. If one who sits up to contemplate upon the glories and beauties of God allows his mind in his seat of meditation to run off the rails, to ramble into other trackless fields of wayside bushes, his spiritual pilgrimage shall end only in sad disaster. The capacity to keep the mind controlled and to cause it to flow in a chosen direction, called concentration, is gained by the aspirants in their devotion at the feet of the Murti or through their deeds and ponderings over the significances and pregnant suggestions of the illustrations. When one has thus gained either through bhakti or by karma or by jnana paths sufficient amount of this sacred wealth of concentration, inner purification, and Lord's grace, he is fit to enter the last lap of the journey of the self. It is at this stage alone, when an aspirant recognizes himself to be nothing other than the self, when the bhakta gets his separative ego sense completely merged in the consciousness of the presence of the Lord of his heart, that the Jnani and the Bhakta come to the plane of the absolute perfection, otherwise called God or truth, and yet the seekers following any path can, by themselves, walk into this last lap of the journey. By long and sincere pursuit, every aspirant comes to gain a kind of attachment to the very path he is pursuing. It needs courage and grit, and often even violence, to howl himself out of the divine life rut into the ampler fields of the life divine. It is the Guru's job to give this last kick, as it were, to a heroic seeker in his self effort. In this connection, we shall have a very practical example in the maiden attempt of the present day master parachutist. However daring a performer he may be today, he must have certainly had a first day and a first jump in the instruction room. His instructors must have explained to him thoroughly with chalk and blackboard the entire science behind the principle of parachute jump so as to convince him intellectually of the safety of their air adventure. But for all the trainees' theoretical knowledge, his first hand information of his comrades who have jumped, and even his actual witnessing of the scene of his own friends jumping, he shall not feel confident at the moment when fully equipped he is brought to the trap door of the plane in the air. That is at the moment of the real plunging through, at the first attempt at the trap door, looking down and gazing with his eyes the distance of the fall. He shall not, if he be human, find enough courage to let himself slip out through the open doorway. In all cases, the instructor and his fellow comrades must bundle him up and physically push him out into the void. And once he is thus out of the plane, his class lessons are applied by him in that the unknown world of new experience almost instinctively, after a few repeated chances to live personally this unknown and strange experience, the trainee becomes a self confident master parachutist ready at a moment's notice to plunge out from the noisy castles of the air and enjoy with effortless ease the joy of floating about in grace and poise through Lord's own space. A guru is the instructor who, out of kindness and consideration, pushed the trainee, the fit aspirant, into the actual realm of experiencing. The act of this kind push is accomplished during the initiation of the student into the sacred meaning of the is the sacred into the sacred meaning of the Upanishad mantras. The Upanishads, as you know, contain the philosophical portion of our religion. Theology is a low roofed world. The moment rational thinking raises its head in a question mark within us, that very moment theology crumbles down into wreck and ruin. It is at such moments that the individual raises his head above and beyond the rafters and ceilings of prejudices and intolerances, orthodoxy and fanaticism, rituals and formalities, into the vast skies of philosophy. In the Yaksha story, Indra represents such a fit student who is being initiated into the truth by Sri Uma Devi herself. A mere knowledge that is Brahman cannot take anybody to the supreme goal of peace within himself. In this sense, the initiation of Indra into Brahma Vidya was in no way complete. Indra gained only a theoretical knowledge of what truth is. सा ब्रह्मेति होवाच ब्रह्मणो वा एतद्विजये महीयध्वमिति ततो हैव विदाञ्चकार ब्रह्मेति. Preceptor says, Brahman, she exclaimed, indeed, through Brahman's victory have you gained greatness. Then alone he understood that the adorable spirit Yaksha was Brahman. Even though Indra had thus only information about the identity of the Yaksha, the Shruti continues to explain to us the greatness of such knowledge. Nay, the Upanishad Rishis, by means of this story, extol Brahma Vidya to such an extent that they say that even the arrogant and conceited Lord of Fire and Lord of Wind have come to be recognized with greater reverence and respect, even in the very kingdom of the gods, because these gods of the elements chanced to come nearest to the supreme truth in its manifestations. तस्माद्वा एते देवा अतितरामिवान्यान् देवान् यदग्निर्वायुरिन्द्रस्ते येनन्नेदिष्ठं पस्पृशुस्ते येन प्रथमो विदाञ्चकार ब्रह्मेति. Therefore, verily, these gods, Agni, Vayu, and Indra, excel the other gods, for they approached the spirit, the manifestation of the Supreme, the nearest, and they were the first to know him as Brahman. Not satisfied with this, crude though it may seem to us, in this modern world of specialized knowledge, the Shruti continues to applaud and extol the science of self-perfection by declaring that Indra had come to enjoy the honors of the king of even Lord Vayu and Lord Agni because of the rare privilege he had of knowing for the first time the identity of Brahman directly from the Divine Mother Uma herself. तस्माद्वा इन्द्रोऽतितरामिवान्यान् देवान् स येनन्नेदिष्ठं पस्पर्श स येनथ प्रथमो विदाञ्चकार ब्रह्मेति. And therefore, indeed, Indra excels other gods, for he approached the spirit nearest, and he was the first to know him as Brahman. Just as Indra came to excel all other gods, one who is the pursuer of truth and who has come to know the identity of that through a study of the Shrutis shall come to enjoy an excellence among his fellow men. In order to come to near that, the student will have to reach the sacred condition of the Indrasthiti. As explained here, he who has a passionate eagerness to understand humbleness and selflessness in his seeking an inexhaustible faith in the one's own success is said to be in the Indra condition. To him, truth shall reveal its absolute nature, at the very mention of it through a man of knowledge, the sacred Guru. The sacred moment of the vision of truth is no long and enduring in the first few instances of experiencing. They come in flashes so quick and sudden that a meditator, unless he is extremely sensitive and extraordinary alert with his sharpened awareness, shall miss these moments of illumination. This idea is emphasized here in the Shruti when she uses these two illustrations, the subjective and the cosmic. तस्यैष आदेशः यदेतद्विद्युतो व्यद्युतदा इति न्यमेमिषदा इत्यधिदैवतम्. This is the description of Brahman, description by means of an illustration. He shone forth like the splendor of the lightning. He disappeared within the twinkling of the eye. This is the comparison of the Brahman with reference to the Devas, his manifestation as cosmic powers. Adesha means an illustration by means of which Brahman is explained. Here is an example which beautifully explains not only the vividness of the experience but also the flashy quickness of the vision of truth which the sadhaka comes to experience vitally as his own self. Also, as in lightning, even if the flash be but for a split moment, the light of it is so bright that it spreads all around. Similarly, though the experience be but very momentary in the final living moment of truth consciousness, God consciousness, the God man's experience of truth is not within himself only, but also all around and about him. At the vision of truth, nothing else remains as known and or unknown, but that non-dual one without a second truth alone is, and that I am is the God experience. Again, the illustration of the winking of the eye shows how natural and effortless is the final fight to the beyond in meditation. All efforts in meditation are only for the beginner. A swimmer drowns and gulps down water only during the few days of his learning to float in water. Having mastered the art, a rope dancer is bored to repeat night after night his acrobatics and fears of balance. Although he must have had his own falls and bruises, thrills and joys during his attempts at mastering his art. Similarly, a meditator may have a struggle to keep his mind in balance and he is in peace during his early attempts, but ere long, as he gains more and more confidence and balance, he shall with a joyous ease float into himself and there, in an effortless effort, meet face to face the one, his own self. Not being satisfied with an illustration from the cosmic in her kindness, the Shruti gives to her devotees another Adesha from the microcosm. अथाध्यात्मं यदेतद्गच्छतीव च मनः अनेन चैतदुपस्मरत्यभीक्ष्णं सङ्कल्पः. Now, as regards this description from the point of view of his manifestation as Atman within the body, as one thinks of Brahman by the mind, and as speedily as the mind wills. Another illustration to explain the effortless and quick success with which a true aspirant can come to realize the truth is given in this mantra. The terms used in the mantra Gacchativa as though going out and Avikshnam again and again in their essence embrace the theory of perception according to Vedanta, which we had already discussed in our earlier discussions. The mind, alive with Chaitanya as it were, flows out through the Indriyas to the objects and there takes the form of the objects. When the possessor of the mind gains the knowledge of the objects, again, it is a subjective psychological experience that human mind is never at rest nor ever silent till the mind is docked with tamas in its deep sleep state. The mind is a meaningless hall of revelry and drunken noise where desire prompted thought, demons dance their eternal death dances. Silence within is joy infinite and bliss absolute, and the yogin alone knows what it is. To an ordinary mortal in his wickedness, his within is a stormy center of dreadful commotions and horrible storms, waves after waves of different thoughts rise up, lash on each other, and die into the very nothingness from which they rose and in which they existed. Supposing a thought wave has just risen, it rises, holds itself intact for a split moment, and then perishes. Just as the sea is never without waves, the mind can never exist without thoughts. The moment a thought wave has subsided, instantaneously another rises, which again perishes only to breed many more in its place. However infinitesimal it may be, there certainly must be a period of time which is an interval between two successive thought waves. In this interval, the previous thought wave has set and the new one has not yet risen. That is the moment when mind is empty of thoughts. And you all know from our previous discussions that mind is but a flow of thoughts, and that mind is not there when thoughts are absent. Also, we have found that it is the conclusion of the Shrutis that when mind is not there, the yogin shall come to experience truth. It becomes now evident how pregnant in significance and import is this innocent looking term in the mantra, namely Abhikshnam, and such a subtle factor inside us is taken to serve as an illustration for the Shruti to explain the flashy moments of appearance and disappearance of truth. It must be obvious to every one of you how inimitably true and perfect a comparison this is to indicate the sudden and lightning moment of experience of truth that one shall gain in one's early meditation. तद्वनं नाम तद्वनमित्युपासितव्यं स य एतदेवं वेदा विहनगं सर्वाणि भूतानि संवाञ्छन्ति. Brahman is well known as Tadvanam, the one who is to be worshipped as the Atman of all living beings. So it is to be meditated upon as Tadvanam. All love him who know it thus. The Upanishad teacher is here giving a method of upasana, method of meditation, for the use of the lesser students who cannot directly profit by the philosophic declaration of the Upanishad so far given. Nowadays, we have very little of the upasana methods practiced in the religious and in the spiritual fields. But in the Vedic period, we find that all sadhakas were well versed in the methods of upasana, and a conscious and deliberate attempt was made by the upasaka to keep his mind exclusively running in the contemplation of a given idea and its application to the cosmic. When a meditator thus meditates upon a given idea to the total exclusion of all other ideas, he comes to enjoy the fruit of his upasana. To a seeker striving to realize the truth declarations in Vedanta, the sacred full fruit of upasana is the invaluable spiritual treasure that he comes to earn in the form of his own powers of concentration and inner expansion. At present, very few Hindus practice upasana. Instead of the earlier technique of peaceful and intellectual meditation, nowadays we have a modernized application of the same technique in bhakti, a path wherein love agitations and emotions storm within and bring the mind to a still state of meditation. Bhakti is the path given to us by the genius Vyas through the Puranas. Till the days of the Puranas, the life of the Aryans was a constant effort at self perfection through unbroken introvert inquiries conducted in an atmosphere of external peace and internal intellection. Just like meditation, devotion also prepares and purifies a sadhaka with equal efficiency and makes him fit for the other higher contemplation on God as the absolute truth. The lesser evolved aspirants need this initial training before they can start the practice of deeper meditation upon the nameless and the formless. Here, Shruti, out of her mercy and love, is prescribing for the lower standard students a method of meditation to be practiced as a preliminary training. Shruti says that those who practice Vedanta should meditate upon the Supreme Reality as Tadvana, meaning one deserving to be worshipped as the all-pervading spirit. To a very careful student of this Shruti, the present mantra may read as a contradiction of itself, since in the earlier part of the Kenopanishad we have read an uncompromising and positive condemnation of worshipping the deities. But on going deep into the significance, we can easily understand that what the Shruti condemned in the earlier part is not idol worship as such, but the sad practice of the sadhaka's misunderstanding the means with the end. Worship and upasana are not in themselves an end, They are means for purifying and perfecting the student's inner instruments, such as his mind and intellect. And when once this has been accomplished, the student is to make use of the prepared instruments for the higher purposes of deeper and more intense meditation. But ordinarily, men who lack discrimination and renunciation reach the spiritual path, and in order to trade in their sensuous joys, they barter away the golden chances which Upasana means meditation provides them for achieving the highest. No idam yadidam upasate. Not this upon which you do your upasana is only a warning to those who perform the upasana with no other idea than the finite joys or rewards of higher world or of some paltry gains in this very life. As you think, so you become is an eternal principle, and all religions in the world work upon this broad principle in nature. Here, Shruti also gives us a clue. He who meditates upon the Lord as a benevolent power pervading everywhere and vitalizing every being, such an upasaka becomes the very thing he meditates upon, and thus comes to enjoy the love and adoration of his entire generation. उपनिषदम्भो ब्रूहीति उत्तात् उपनिषद्ग्रामीं वावत उपनिषदमब्रूमेति. Disciple says, Sir, teach me the saving knowledge. Receptor says, the saving knowledge has been imparted to you. Verily, we have imparted the saving knowledge of Brahman to you. This is not a question from one who has not understood the Upanishad given out by his Guru. In its technique, it may be said that this is a literary method employed in those times to indicate that the Shastras have been completely dealt with and that nothing remains to be added. Also, it shows how the student is anxious to hear more and more from the Guru regarding any other point that the teacher might probably have reserved to be added as a warning or complementary item of information sacred and unavoidable for the real and complete understanding of the Upanishads. Again, this question shows that the student meant to ask about the necessary yoga technique or about the inner purification without which he had heard a correct apprehension of the Upanishad statements was not possible, and much less could he have a full inward personal experience of the deep seated truth and godliness in him. This interpretation is supported by the following passage of the Upanishad, which explains the tapas and the practices necessary for the right and full understanding of the Upanishad mantras. तस्य तपोदमः कर्मेति प्रतिष्ठा वेदाः सर्वाङ्गानि सत्यमायतनम्. Austerity, restraint, and dedicated work, these are the foundations of it. The saving knowledge of the Upanishads, the Vedas, and its lean and truth is its abode. The teacher had already in the previous mantra said that he declared the entire Upanishad. One has really to wonder why, even after a declaration so open as that with which she had concluded, Should the Shruti now add more and more mantras? This is no literary fault in an Upanishad drafted and couched in a conversational style. The disciple had asked, "If you remember, sir, teach me the saving knowledge." These words in the mouth of the disciple can have two implications. First, it directly implies the demand for a clear declaration from the teacher that the Upanishad had actually ended, and it indirectly implies also that the student wants some more information regarding the technique of self perfection. Although the teacher had amply explained the identity of the director of the sense organs, mind, and intellect, the great master had not detailed the method by which the deluded can come to realize this supreme knowledge. This query of how one can realize the perfection pointed out by the scriptures is the typical spirit exclusive to the Hindu philosophy. No other race in the world has developed a culture of though so complete, a culture of thought so complete and perfect as the Aryan grandsires who are the seers of the most comprehensive, the most rational, the most tolerant religion of true love as expounded in Vedanta. To the thinkers of the Aryan stock, philosophy is not a mere view of life. To the practical man of life and action, it was a mere dreamy utopia and a womanish game of meddling at emotional and intellectual embroidery. Even today, to the West, philosophy is only a view of life, and as such, they have no fundamental values to preach. Generation after generation, the thinkers of the West had to change their idealistic view of life according to the spirit of the age and the systems that came to govern it. To our forefathers, philosophy was not only a mere view of life, but it was at once a way of life. The very name with which in Sanskrit we understand philosophy is darshan, a word which has come from a root meaning to know. That is, however subtle the truth may be, to the practical men of life, the seers, a mere dream ideal was no fulfillment of their honest cravings. Whenever they, through intellect, had to determine the glories of an ideal, they at once took it up and applied it in practical life as a principle to live. So too, even they contemplated upon truth and came by the principle of God. They were not satisfied by merely getting at a symbol or an idol to worship. To bow to and to kneel at realization is the uh, worship to bow to and to kneel at. Realization is the very watchword of Aryan Sanatan Dharma. Poetry writing or word coining, prose poetry or dexterous word play were all to them too childish a game to play. Their culture was the culture of life and not a tradition of dreams. Thus, there is a wealth of significances implied, though unsaid, in the words of the disciple who was a perfect representative of the Upanishadic age. Naturally, the teacher, understanding this noble Aryan thirst, not only to know the ideal, but to realize, to live, and to become the ideal himself, most sympathetically explains the very cornerstones of our ancient Sanatan Dharma in this mantra. The absolute truth in the modern vocabulary, the God principle, says the Upanishad, rests as it were upon austerity, self restraint, and dedicated selfless work. That these are unavoidable values to be lived by one before that subject can be conditioned sufficiently for a perfect tuning up with the subtlest of the subtle. The truth is a fact that can be known even by a man of average intelligence. No religion in the world sanctions or encourages anything other than these divine values. If today we are living certain wrong ideals contrary to these sacred principles of austerity, self restraint, and selfless seva, service, they indeed are the very serpents that poison the sources of our modern life. Individual, communal, national, and international sorrows and tragedies of the day can all be directly traced to this senile spirit of the age from which these noble qualities, sustainers of true life, have been thoughtlessly eschewed with a suicidal deliberateness almost amounting to madness. An aspirant, unless he has the courage to refuse himself the courtings of his mind, cannot progress in the spiritual path. Religion is not meant for a feminine character who has not got the courage and the spirit of freedom to stand away from the mad wooings of the toy king, the mind in the inner world of his dreams. He alone can stride forward to schedule on the noble path of truth, who has a capacity to say a strong no to the childish demands of the mind, ever to run about and play in the scorching heat of temptations amidst the sandy dirt heap of its sensuous objects. Hence, the insistence by the Shruti for practicing austerity. Shruti goes to the extent of giving austerity, tapas, the status of being the very foundation for the temple of truth. If austerity means a physical denial of the indriyas coming into contact with their objects, with low animal appetites and delusory hopes of getting thereby some passing joy, dhamma, restraint, means controlling and choking at its very source the annihilating flood of the desire lava, both being but forms of self control. Austerity is physical while restraint is psychological. In short, without a certain amount of self control, self perfection is impossible. It is as futile as the blind man yearning to have at least one look at his only son. When the physical and psychological personality in an aspirant is thus purified, ennobled, and divinized, then Shruti demands of him selfless, dedicated work. If what you say be true, all of you may wonder what exactly is then the meaning of the Shruti Vakya. that karma is one of the cornerstones of the absolute truth. In Brahma Vidya, karma means the sacrificial rites of the total spiritual sadhanas or the total spiritual sadhanas worship, prayer, satsang, japa, dhyana, and such other daily practices of a devotee all come within the term karma. And here the Shruti advises all the sincere pursuers of truth that they should not indulge in worship and prayer with a view to gaining an immediate relief from sorrow or a future treasure of wealth. When devotion is practiced in a spirit of selfless gopi love, the divine shall manifest to play in and around us and steal and eat away the cream of impressions we have churned out from the milk of our real nature. When one has practiced with sincerity, faith, and honesty of purpose both the outer austerity and the inner restraint, he is fit for karma, he alone is fit for karma. A true Brahmin he is he, and when such a fit karma yogin applies himself with true devotion and perseverance to any one of the four main paths of sadhana, advised and encouraged by the inimitable religion, Hinduism, he shall develop himself into a fit student for the early meditations. He shall come to recognize, realize, and live the truth that he is. This mantra, though almost the last one, is at once the only mantra dedicated in the entire Upanishad to prescribe the technique by which the philosophic contents of the Upanishads may be practiced as a way of life. Hence, every word of it is so pregnant with suggestions and overfilled with significances that at each intellectual thrust at it, it pours forth the precious contents of directions. Thus, the mantra says that the Vedas are all its limbs in the absolute truth. Limbs cannot be since thereby the absolute would become conditioned by the name and the form. Thus, Shruti means all the six supplementary Vedas are a necessary support for a student who is seeking to realize within himself the self that is the theme of the Upanishads. In the modern vocabulary, we may say that self perfection is difficult and would be a miracle if it were to come at the end of diligent and sincere lifelong practices. If the realized saint were to be illiterate, uncultured, and uneducated. In short, what we as seekers of truth must understand from this mantra is that no education is a waste, no bit of knowledge redundant, no experience superfluous, but that they all can be intelligently made to serve our purpose in our pilgrimage to truth. And lastly, volumes can be written about the inexpressible expression Satyamayatanam, meaning that truth's abode is truth. Without a Harishchandra like vow of truthfulness, no sadhaka can enter the sanctum sanctorium of the truth. If a Brahmin, meaning a sadhaka, fails in his alignment with his motives, thoughts, and actions, that is, if his motives are false to his thoughts and his thoughts again belie his actions, Such Brahmins are viewed from the heights of Upanishadic perfections, mere Chandalas, and they shall not enter the temple of truth. यो वा एतामेवं वेदापहत्य पाप्मानम् अनन्ते सर्गे लोके जेये प्रतितिष्ठति इति चतुर्थः खण्डः। more desperate she became, and more poignant her sorrow. It is then, when she was prostrate with despair, that her Lord entered the room. She poured out her story of woe, but Alban all of a sudden blinked at her and asked her, "What is there on your poor neck?" The woman, because she had complete faith in her Lord, believing him to be honest, slowly lifted her searching fingers to her neck, and lo, the moment the tip of the fingers touched one of the beads of the necklace, she gained the knowledge that the necklace was with her, and with this knowledge she regained her lost condition of bliss and joy. The necklace was never made new, it was always there. The misunderstanding that on the removal of that misunderstanding, which is the same as saying the connecting factors should be the same woman, complete extraordinary. She becomes the woman she was before coming of the misunderstanding. God, though the soul has come to be He can for himself discover the beauties and the secret charms of this nectar. He himself the divine concept. We have had so long a discussion of one of the manifestations of tamas, The other is the agitations of the mind called vikshepa. From this vikshepa arises the unmanifest world, the subconscious, and from it the grosser emphasis and assertion of the manifest, the world of the five elements. The interplay of the elements produces the names and forms of objects, including the sense of knowledge and the senses of knowledge and the senses of action, which together constitute the sad, tearful, ineffectual mortal, the helpless samsari. With this, the fall of man, the arrow on the left side in the chart is complete. From being the eternal, immortal, powerful, Nitya, Shuddha, Mukta, Paramatman, pure consciousness, due to the play of Maya, like Somadatta's Sagar, we too have come to feel our own limitations and live in the unbuilt huts with our unmarried wife and unborn son. Vedanta is not a pessimistic philosophy to leave its conclusions with a mere theory of the form. This very theory has been devised to explain the non-existent dream form so that the faithful may be shown a way to make up and realize their own true and eternal nature, the Om. All the different religions in the world, of the world, and all the different yogas in Hinduism, however distinct they might seem to be in their approaches, all of them with one voice insist that man must learn to control his sense organs of knowledge and action. Self-control without and with a beginning is the one point on which all seem in melodious agreement. So long as stresses as traces of delusion are in us, we shall have desires rising up in us. They feed the indriyas to roam out among their respective sense objects. With knowledge alone can we end our ignorance. The knowledge of our real nature, the realization of the Shivoham state, the recognition that I am Chinmayan, the knowledge that I am not this name and form personality, but a homogeneous mass of pure consciousness alone can end our ignorance, avidya, the delusion, bhranti, the source of all the desire eruptions. But pure knowledge is our eternal Swarupa, and thus it is not a state to be created. We have only to end the clouding, confusing, deluding ignorance, and when the clouds move off, the sun hidden behind them appears in all its brilliance. This removal of nescience is through hearing, reflection and meditation. And we have already seen how the very power of tamas acts upon us and how each of its strategy is met and defeated by the Vedanta, Sadhana, Shravana, Manana and Nididhyasana. Thus, by the time of student reaches the Manana state, he gains more and more of the intellectual understanding about the futility of seeming happiness and peace in the world of sense objects. Here starts the real control of the sense organs, and when he gains slowly a little of sense control, the agitations of the mind created by his contact with the world of sense objects are reduced. This enables him to gain 1,000-fold joy, peace and tranquility within, and consequently his meditation flights reach higher levels and his concentration becomes more pointed and firm. Hand in hand the team works. The more the aurora is controlled, the more the vikshepa is stilled, the more the tossings and agitations are pacified, the easier the veil gets rolled off. In course of time, in proportion to the intensity of abhyasa, the twin dualism manifestations of tamas are both completely controlled, and we shall then have sublimated the rajas tamas defects in us with consequent gain of sattva in us. As we here reflect and meditate upon the Shruti, mantras, the scriptures, the disturbances and muddiness from our mental lake are eliminated. Naturally, the pure sun of knowledge, the eternal truth, gets reflected clearly. The clearest and the truest reflection of the eternal truth is the God principle. Therefore, a sadhaka slowly comes to manifest in himself divinity and godliness at this stage. Miracles are easy to him. Grace is naturally to him. Kindness becomes his instinct. Love is his very breath. Mercy is his essence. Truthfulness becomes his very train. And lordliness is birthright. In short, a God-man on earth, he lives poor or starving, suffering or in health, laughing or weeping, to rule, guide and enlighten. At this stage, if he is yet steady in his sadhana and can still maintain his divine urge to know and to become, if he is dispassionate enough to reject and renounce even the powers and joys of godhood, he, during the highest flights of his deepest meditation, walks even beyond the yonder summits of sattva and becomes sattva-pita, or one who has transcended even the gods. He experiences in himself the supreme truth and becomes that, and having reached home and merging in home, he becomes whole. He gains the Paramam Padam, the finale, the goal of perfection, the bliss absolute. There in him rests all. The universe has only risen from him. In him it exists, towards him it moves, into him it finally must enter, and afterwards become him, the one eternal truth. absolute. The arrow on the left shows the direction of the fall of the man from own division. The arm on the right shows the ascent of man from the values of chaos to the state of Satchidananda, the soul. Thus, without the control of the Indriyas, no spiritual growth is ever possible, and no control is effective until we start the hear, reflect, meditate, schooling. Study the Upanishads independently, think over them, meditate regularly, hand in hand, learn to control your senses through control of the desires, intelligently pursue sadhana. Success shall be yours. Here and now is the assurance repeatedly given by the scriptures with patience and faith. Serve, love, purify, meditate, and realize truth is the very word. Om Shri Chinmayananda Namaha. Om Shri Sadgurunath Maharaj ki Jai. Hari Om.